Hello, I like weird games. Not necessarily games trying to be weird, though that can certainly have its own appeal, but most of all, I like games where it feels like the developer was creating something they genuinely believed in. And it still came out weird. I think one of the key differentiators is accessibility. Whether it feels like the creator is going to have a nervous breakdown if you miss a single beat of how weird their game is, or if the game seems to actively resent you for playing it. Be it through aneurysm-inducing difficulty, cryptic puzzles, or perplexing game design choices, it doesn't give up its weirdness lightly. One such peddler of these games is the little-known developer Arkhouse, some dude from Lithuania who's been cranking these things out since 2016 and already has 10 games under his belt, in spite of their often lukewarm receptions. I feel like if I had that much tenacity, I could have taken over the world by now. Anyway, join me on this journey through his weird and wonderful mind, starting with Mirage of Dragon. Consider this video a bit of an Arkhouse roundup. I'm not going to go through all 10 in deference to my sanity and this video's length, but 5 should be enough to get the point across. So the game starts, and we're dropped into this rather yellow world. If the intro text didn't clue you in, this game is pretty esoteric. It doesn't tell you where to go, it doesn't tell you what to do, and it doesn't even tell you what's going on, so you do the only thing you can do, and that's wander around. It appears to be a platformer, but that's not exactly right. It's certainly something, I can tell you that. Apart from the general weirdness, the first thing that jumps out at you are the controls. There's only 6 buttons, WASD, jump, and memories, which on top of being the menu, also contains some of your character's thoughts unique to each screen of the game. These gnomic paragraphs are pretty much your only chance at understanding even a fraction of what in the world is going on here. Pretty much the only thing that's stated as a matter of fact is that you're dead and this is hell. Arabian hell more precisely. The second thing that jumps out at you is the jumping. You always jump at a fixed height, which leaves the platforming, pretty much the only challenge present, feeling rather clunky. You saw this kind of jump a lot in older games, the most salient example being the Castlevania series on NES, but even Super Mario had dynamic jump heights back in 1985. There is air strafing, but I can't tell if the fixed jump height is a programming skill issue or a deliberate anachronism by the creator. That's the thing about these auteur game developers, you never really know what was and wasn't intentional, though I can say, regardless, it doesn't really improve the gameplay. Normally when I talk about these games, I go from start to finish, but this game stands in absolute defiance to your meager notions of linearity. The whole game is a bit of a labyrinth, and you just kind of choose a direction and keep heading towards it in search of some form of motivation. Keep in mind that you're given absolutely no guidance but to explore and look for a so-called Mirage of Dragon. I've kind of been avoiding talking about the actual specifics because that requires talking about the story, seeing as not much makes sense without it. Heck, not much makes sense with it. But even after playing through this whole thing, there's very little I can say with absolute certainty, and that's because of the way everything is framed. You have no memories and know nothing about yourself, except that despite being dead, you're still obsessed with finding some dragon, but beyond that, you're in this weird time limbo where echoes of past and future events occur simultaneously, and so you've got all these mirages of yourself from previous or future wanderings you did before losing your memories again. Trying to pin anything down is like climbing a mountain of mud, it just slips through your fingers. Because not only do you need to figure out what all the abstract imagery is actually alluding to, you need to place it temporally. Well, after wandering around the main area, you might come across one of these rooms with another mirage of yourself. And if you check your memories here, instead of getting some text, this happens. Then you're transported somewhere, presumably through one of your old memories. These areas are all linear and offer some soft platforming challenges for you to do while you look at the backgrounds. This one in particular, well, it reinforces how amorphous everything in this story feels, where what is ostensibly your memories is also a shattered landscape beneath these cosmic planetary vistas. You realize that Hell, or Hatama as it's called here, and the dragon isn't purely metaphorical, the setting is actually fantastical. On top of your story, you also need to piece together the setting as well. Thankfully, there's a library you can find that contains most of the background information, which was supposedly written by your past selves, but it's still difficult to parse. It reads like the rough notes one writes before penning a fantasy novel so they don't forget the details while the larger plot remains in their head, but that's probably not far off. I don't know why all the text is formatted vertically. If I didn't know better, I would have assumed that this game was translated from Japanese. Also, walking between these rooms to get these nuggets of lore is quite tedious, as leaving the room doesn't spawn you at the door you entered, it spawns you at the start of the screen. Then you need to walk all the way to the next one. Anyway, trying my best to summarize it, some people in the past could summon dragons and control them, which led to great empires and powerful dragon lords, but that age is long gone and there's only a few dragons left. It's also a dying Earth setting, where most everything left is just sand and desert, which you're supposed to extrapolate from your character's confusion about what the word sea refers to in some ancient text he found, plus the occasional mentions to the fractured tribal state of humanity. And if that's not bad enough, everything is also being consumed by an entropic force referred to as the Silence, which we can see in the background and in things like this. It's unclear if this silence is supposed to be a personified force, given its effects on you, or if it's just a metonym for entropy and death. In any case, there's several references saying that the purpose of the silence is to return everything to primeval darkness, which is the same force that created the world and also apparently where you are right now, drifting through an endless fractured mirage of the real world. There's some talk about you being a shadow unable to escape, and perhaps if you kill the dragon you'll be able to escape and go to an afterlife presumably, but most of this is just pure speculation. If you get to the end of one of these areas, you'll get something like this. It's just a set piece with some text above it. You might run around confused a bit, wondering what the point of it all was, but reading the memory paragraph for each screen and seeing this dragon's skull is the point. In fact, if you get creative and decide to stand where an echo of yourself once stood, you'll be rewarded with being brought back to the beginning. That's really it. Time to explore someplace else then. Going to another desert, we eventually end up in another chamber that looks just like the ones that brought us into Memories, except it's all dark, and if we walk to the other end, we're brought into this. It's a boss fight against a dragon called R.U.N.E. Well, it's more like a boss puzzle, or a boss trial and error, because the only challenge is jumping through these teleporting walls and finding out which way puts you in deeper or teleports you back out. When we get to the center, it just disappears and then the game fades out and says we found a Mirage of Dragon. This is another layer to the confusion, because the creator isn't a native English speaker, and I'll never know for sure if there's an artistic meaning to the wording, or he meant to say, I found a Mirage of the Dragon. There's a handful of grammatical errors elsewhere too. Regardless, it's just a mirage, and so we're told to restart and wander around some more. Like I said, this game's hard to cover completely, so I'm just gonna go through all the dragons and then tell you what I think this whole thing is supposed to mean. I'm going in the temporal order, not necessarily the order in which I fought them, but to reach the second dragon, you need to go through this room with a ton of yourself and wait on top of one specific one and you'll be transported here. The second one is called Parasite, and as far as I can tell, chronologically it follows after Embryon. To defeat it, we just need to avoid its particles it throws out and jump into its main body twice. I feel like there's got to be some significance to the dude in the middle, but again, we're told it's another mirage and back to searching we go. The next one is the one I found last, and that's because it's hidden in one room out of like 20 in the library and can only be accessed by jumping on a hidden platform behind the text. I genuinely don't know how you'd find this anyway other than by accident. Only reason I found it was because the developer put a password-protected PDF in the game's files that tells you where it is. Anyway, the third dragon is Abervolg, this crazy meat chariot abomination. At first I didn't realize that all these walls were actually in the foreground, and I was wondering why I was getting stuck and dying. This boss seems to be in reference to the library passage that mentioned summoners controlling dragon chariots via painful needles. All you need to do is run away until you get to the end and grab this thing. Try to avoid landing on the spikes. It starts running away, so presumably we can defeat it now. Let's try that again? Let's touch it very gently this time. Okay, there we go. And that's another mirage down. The next one is through this portal. It's called Ecus, and it's growing out of a pillar or something. I'm not really certain what that means, but there was some mention of dragons fused with castles, so I guess it's that. You need to touch all these pillars, but if you touch one of these portals, you're thrown out and need to climb all the way back up again. Once you touch all of them, a chess piece appears and it explodes, I guess. Yeah, so once again, it's another mirage down. Once you've gone through most of it, you realize that the actual map isn't all that big, but there are some secrets here and there, like this one that drops you into this door maze. The doors disappear when you walk over them, and there's a normal way out, but there's also a super secret way out if you make this door vanish and wait for 30 seconds. I found this one on accident by checking some messages, and if it weren't for that, I doubt I ever would have found it on my own. But it is the next dragon, Misanthropus. I'm pretty sure the order of these is determined by size, and at first I thought there were different dragons, but I'm pretty sure it's the same one through different points in time. This is the first one that actually looks like a dragon though, and you'll be confused about what to do, but after 30 seconds it suddenly attacks you. You get this shield, and after another minute of doing nothing, it finally launches another projectile, and, this happens. So after the initial shock wears off, you realize you can control these two fireballs and can pop these orb things, and when they're all gone you can crash them into each other and they explode. Then I was at a loss of what to do until I realized I could actually control this thing, just very, very slowly. Finally, when we touch... yeah, so that seems to have defeated it. Not sure what was going on there, it's probably related to the so-called silence, but it's just another mirage. I hope you can see that it's not for lack of trying that I don't understand much. Well, to get to the next one, we need to go to this cube of flesh, check our memories, and now suddenly we're glowing and we can jump into our own spooky face, which brings us to Dreadnought. And to defeat it, we need to go around touching all of these weird fragments after some platforming. I think we're supposed to be inside of it or something. One of the echoes in this room will actually bring you to another place inside of Dreadnought, and if you stand around for a literal minute, you'll just die. Getting the only game over in the entire game. Anyway, after we touch all the things, then we can go in here and control this fireball thing and touch this other thing, and then it dies or something. Yeah, it's another mirage, yada yada. Okay, now I am going to try my absolute hardest to try and explain what I think is going on here. And if you don't want to hear my schizophrenic ramblings, go ahead and skip to the next game, but here I go. Your name is Akeem, you were one of the Radiums, an ancient race of people that once rode dragons across distant stars to arrive here, but that's all forgotten and gone now, and most people are just trying to scrape by with what's left of the world. You're shunned mostly for being different and drift from place to place without much of a purpose, spending time hunting, trekking around temples for alms, and being enslaved until one day you see a mirage of a creature thought to be fictional across the desert. Bereft of a purpose in this dying world, you decide to track down and hunt this assuredly evil dragon, and so you wander into the desert alone. But after who knows how long of surviving and uncovering ancient text on the subject, you died, realizing that it was never there in the first place. However, the dragon did exist, just reflected from somewhere else, and just like you saw it in the mirage, it saw you as well. Like the world, it was dying too, and shortly before or after you died, it died of natural causes itself. Okay, now you're both dead and stuck in the primeval darkness. You know nothing, losing your memories as the silence continues to distort your fractured existence, but you're still driven by your desire to find and battle the dragon. With this as your motivation, you wander the fragments time and time again, despite not knowing why, but you're not just wandering your memories, you're also wandering the dragon's, as evidenced by the dragon egg, dragon's nest, and other things you couldn't have possibly experienced. Your fates are inextricably linked now, okay? The dragon mirages are just like your various incarnations scattered about, except they're visions of the dragon's past starting from an embryo to a parasite, which seems to imply that the dragons here aren't fixed to one form and are capable of merging with other things. I'm going to assume that the figure in the middle has something to do with the summoner's methods of controlling the dragons, considering its next incarnation is as a weapon of war created by ancient dragon summoners. And the one after that is some form of a castle. Equus means horse, and there might be some symbolism in the chess imagery as it resembles a knight piece. After that is Misanthropus, which I think follows after the Age of the Dragon Summoners, but where this one differs is the inner world you jump into. It's linked to the silence somehow because it shows the same three eyes when you check your memories, and you're both morphed this time. The proboscis thing seems to resemble the one on Parasite, and when you touch you're both blown away. I don't think this one is part of a mirage. I think this actually happened within the primeval darkness, or will happen. The next one is Dreadnought, and it seems to resemble an enormous aquatic creature. This was probably the final form of the Dragon of the Sea, which aligns with all of the supposed text you uncovered. Then after who knows how long, it turned into the Dragon Skull in the Valley of Bones and was eventually consumed by the silence. Also, the fact that you jump into your own face to get inside of it seems to further imply that you're connected somehow. Okay. This culminates in the final boss, and the one true dragon appearing after you visit all three of the mirages of the White Wanderer, who may or may not be you from the future. And that leads you to this thing called the Dragon King. To defeat it, you just need to go through its wacky maze without getting hit or falling into one of these portals, and then finally touch it at the end. And when you do, you realize it was a dragon parasitically attached to you, which I can only assume is because of the previous interaction with Misanthropus. Following that, you manage to escape the primeval darkness and use its power to fly across the stars and out of the reach of the silence, both of you linked together and perhaps towards the place your people originally came from. Is that what actually happened? Who knows? I am probably the only person on this planet who put real and genuine effort into trying to figure out what in the actual hell I just played. There is absolutely no one who's offered an alternative theory, and believe me, I scoured every mention of this game I could find on the internet. But I like it. I feel like a pioneer of weirdness. I will say, so much of Mirage of Dragon feels like hollow symbolism that's meant to stupefy rather than build to something, and while it might look cool, it ends up muddying the already diaphanous plot in a game whose entire raison d'etre is its plot. There are several parts where Akeem just blatantly says, it could be this, or it could be that, who knows, and so I can only assume that being utterly confused is the intended result. Alright, I've got to get this game out of my head before I go insane. I'm not going to criticize it. I feel like everything I could say has already been made self-evident by now. Though it definitely made me think, and I'm probably going to remember this bizarre platformer for the rest of my life. So yeah, that was Mirage of Dragon. It was definitely something, and my head hurts. Anyway, next up we've got Seal of the Curse, a sequel to Simon's Quest. Yeah, the NES game from 1987. At least this time it's kind enough to explain its plot. I've actually played Castlevania 1, 3, and 4, but unfortunately all of my knowledge of 2 comes from the AVGN, so I won't really be able to comment on its faithfulness as a sequel. Well, we start in this town, and we get to walk around and talk to people, and it's Castlevania, so naturally Simon Belmont is doing his best David Byrne impression. Looks like the jumping is still a fixed height, except this time we can attack as well. And that locks us into an animation that removes our ability to airstrafe, which never felt good even back in the day, but points for historical accuracy, I guess? There's not much to do around here except to go in here and grab this weapon from this guy that lets us throw something. I'm not really sure what these are supposed to be. Deadly chopsticks, I guess. Whatever the case, some dude tells us that there's a kid looking for us in the next town over, and when we talk to him, he says that there's some demon hidden behind a brick. I assumed he was talking about this because of its brickular nature, and the symbol of my projectile weapon is on it, but it just says immune. Then I realized he was actually talking about this brick, and where we need to go is behind a hidden passage. Then there's another not brick, but the weapon works this time? Yeah, turns out that last one was actually the exact same symbol except turned upside down. Go figure. That leads us into this door into the demon realm and where we get the iconic quote from Castlevania 2. Basically, to try and sum up the plot of this game, we killed Dracula, but he cursed everything with vampire AIDS or something, so now we need to unkill him and then kill him again to stop it, but for reals this time in the demon realm, I guess. I will admit, this remix of Bloody Tears is getting me a little pumped. Oh, come on, are you serious? Yeah, here's a tip for any aspiring game developers. Don't put a death pit right at the start of the screen when players are already going to be holding right. I analyzed the footage and it took me 13 frames from loading the new screen to fall in. That gives me about 217 milliseconds to react to it. Even assuming I could see what I was doing, that's a tall order. It restarts you at the start of the screen, so I can't be mad, it's just, I feel like you can tell the developer couldn't get any playtesters. Not much you can do about that when you're a poor indie dev from Lithuania, I suppose. A little playtesting would have helped Mirage of Dragon too, because then someone could have warned him that it almost makes no sense. These demon manners are a callback to the original Castlevania 2. They're pretty straightforward, and mostly just require walking forwards and killing anything that stops you from moving forwards. While I'm thankful that it isn't faithful to the original in that regard, it does reduce most of it to a sightseeing tour since there's no reason to care about your health. Just like the first game, your goal is to smash an orb at the end, which gives us a minor upgrade of a shield that blocks projectiles when we stand still. Deeper in, there's also the upside-down version of that projectile we were looking for. As far as I can tell, there's no difference in damage, but it does let us break these blocks and go back to the beginning of the manor. Then this dead dude starts yelling at us. That teleports us into this boss fight against this mangled lump of flesh. It doesn't really do anything, it just sits there and lets you smack it all day. But you do need to contend with the infinitely spawning mosquitoes and leeches. Given the jump height and the wind-up animation you've got before your attack actually goes through, actually timing it properly to hit them out of the air is a little tough. Also, we can Goomba stomp these leeches. After smacking it a bunch, it finally dies and we're outside again in the real world. Again. Now that we've got that other projectile, we can get through that brick, and it's about time I mentioned the overworld. Where Simon's Quest had monsters and currency drops in the overworld, this sequel takes the game in a bold new direction by having nothing. It's just a leisurely stroll through nature. I suppose it fits the plot that they're all supposed to be sealed away, but I can't help but feel like I should be doing something other than walking. Because the game isn't strictly linear like the original Castlevania was, this issue is probably why Simon's Quest added some soft RPG elements like grinding currency in an attempt to make the wandering and backtracking less idle. But considering that was also one of the main complaints about the game back in the day, it's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't kind of things. For what it's worth, compared to the alternative, I prefer the stroll through the park. Well, we make it to the next village, and one of the villagers says something about a sorcerer's house, which appears to be this empty one way up here. I was confused at first and wandered around for a bit until I realized that this is a destructible wall over here. I was actually checking for them elsewhere since they're kind of a staple of the series, but this is the first one in the game and the lack of them until now made me less vigilant. Probably because there's no need for hidden wall ham to replenish your health when dying works just as well. That's something La Mulana did great. By the time you're done with that game, there isn't a single surface you haven't viciously attacked yet because the game rewards you just enough. Anyway, as I said, it's not really that difficult, but this is part of why I like digging through games like this. It gives you perspectives on game design that you wouldn't encounter otherwise. Despite these enemies' varied designs, they all feel the same and lack impact. They have different models, different patterns, hit points, projectiles, etc., but functionally they all die after you hit them enough. Yeah, obviously, but because the game is so forgiving, you're never required to engage with the monster's unique mechanics when face-tanking everything they throw at you is just as effective as trying and much less effort. Humans are instinctively lazy, especially in games. There's no incentive to conserve health, so there's no reason to learn how to conserve it. Simple as that. However, trying to increase intentionality via difficulty here would probably create many more problems than just being a little boring, so in the scope of this game, it was probably the right call. Down here is this magic shield thing, and it's possible to skip getting it entirely, beat the manor, and then render the whole game unwinnable because despite not being required to beat this manor, or even the next, it is necessary to beat the last one. Imagine figuring that out at the end. We break another orb, get someone's eye this time, and that lets us summon the boss of this manor. Fasten indeed. It's really hard to suppress my instinct to pick on the grammar sometimes. We're dropped into the second boss fight, and it doesn't restore our health, but fortunately we can get it all back by dying. It's just a matter of timing your throws properly, dodging projectiles, and occasionally smacking some spawns. The magic shield is handy here, but again, not required. After doing that enough times, she dies, and we're back outside. Or should I say inside, because we need to break this wall again. With the eye, we can see this ghost in the graveyard, and he tells us to go find 2 more ghosts. To be fair, the overworld isn't totally devoid of anything to do, even if it is just minor platforming challenges and some collectibles. We can also... not again. We can also use the eye to get across this big pool of water. This isn't one of the 2 ghosts we need to find, it's actually a totally unrelated ghost that just so happens to be around the same area we're supposed to be looking for other ghosts. Anyway, at the end seems to be nothing, but in the water is a secret passage. That leads us into this long series of corridors. Sorry, did I say long? I meant long. This feels like when amateur filmmakers will hold shots of the actors walking all the way from their car to the door just to pad the runtime so they can reach feature length. I suppose it's not as bad as it could be. The dead ends aren't that long, but it still feels excessive. Maybe if there was some movement tech like rolls or dashes to spice things up, but even then it would still feel excessive. At the bottom is this fleshy face thing that's hogging the whole corridor. What a jerk. Well, by alternating between whipping him in the face and using the magic shield to block the spikes he sends, eventually we convince him to die. Our reward is another one of these red orbs. Okay, seriously. Whatever, we backtrack to find this other ghost, and that spawns this ghost that will ferry us across the water and to this cliff with another door. And all we need to do is press down all these buttons, which sends an angry horde of flying skulls after us. There's also a whip upgrade in here. That makes me think though, when you get down to it, there's really no need for damage upgrades like this, because what you've done is arbitrarily increase the enemy's HP only to increase the player's damage to compensate, and now we're back to where we would have been if nothing had changed. If this game were an RPG, it could at least offer some feeling of progression when you suddenly take out a bunch of previously strong enemies with a single swing, but despite the overworld, this game is linear, and we'll never see the weak enemies again. Well, we break the orb and get the next item, which is I guess a liver or something, and then the Grim Reaper shows up. Compared to the normal monsters, the bosses actually do take some thought, and that's because getting hit too much has the consequence of dying, and dying has the consequence of needing to restart the boss. That combined with the fact that you can't get past the boss without defeating it means we've got a challenge. This will probably sound a lot more vitriolic than intended, but going back to my sightseeing tour comments, most of it feels like an extended loading screen between boss fights, as they're the part that feels the most like a game and seeing one is the main motivation. It's really up to you whether you like the tours in between or not. Anyway, we killed death, which is a concept I've never quite understood from Castlevania, and we're outside again. And also our face is melting off. Hooray. That dropped us off somewhere completely different, so we run through this next town, read all the dialogue, and then try to figure out where to go next. There's only ever two directions really, and I end up choosing the one through the graveyard, but it's a dead end with nothing but a duck. And suddenly I'm thrown into a fight against a giant flying Satan duck. I had no idea how to fight it at first, because I can't reach it with my whip from here. It looks like this wall is here to let you throw stuff at it, but it's immune to projectiles as well. Eventually I realized I can hit this platform to move it, which is definitely a little easier said than done. Now we just need to contend with the infinite stream of duck projectiles it keeps sending at us. When we hit it enough, it starts sending out these giant blades at us after every hit. After taking more damage, it starts launching even more blades. Honestly, altogether it's not a bad boss fight. Finally it dies and we get this bag. Cool. The other direction is another dead end, though. But hey, this is the famous cliff from Simon's Quest where you had to stand in the corner holding an orb and wait for a tornado. Speaking of, this game does have the occasional puzzle, but they're nowhere near as cryptic as Simon's Quest. To get to the next area, we need to go down these secret holes in the water and hit these switches, but there's a small visual clue, and one of the villagers tells you about it, so it's not bad. The visuals of this game aren't bad either, and compared to most fan games, it's definitely a cut above in that department. But the environments often feel a bit muddled, at least compared to the high contrast ones in the original Castlevanias. The black vignette on the screen whenever you're in the demon realm exacerbates it a bit too. It's fitting for the grim and gothic aesthetic the creator was going for, but where the high contrast style of the originals made it easier to discern enemies and gameplay elements from the background, showing an emphasis towards action, this one appears to prioritize its visual style. I'm not saying that that was a wrong decision, if it even was a decision. Play to your strengths, I guess. And it was the visual style that made me play these games in the first place, but it does feel like gameplay is in the backseat. Regardless, there's a hammer over here, which lets us get the orb. And then I'm not sure where to go next, which seems weird considering all these manors are just two screens. Is it here? Nope, that's a fake floor. Up here? Nope, that's another fake floor. Except no, that's actually it. We just need to jump into the edge of the screen, even though that didn't work at all just below. This boss killed me more than anything else. Not only are you stuck on these platforms and getting hit by pretty much anything knocks you off, it's completely invulnerable to your whip and projectiles. So you think you've got to use the hammer we just found, but it's impossible to get close enough. It launches these daggers, and I assume I've got to use my magic shield to reflect them, but nope, that just gets me killed. It actually does block the projectile, but some lingering jank gets me killed anyway. So what you need to do is hit the daggers with your hammer, which took me a while to figure out because I was pretty sure I already tried that and it just exploded, but as it turns out, it actually just hit my shield instead. Actually hitting these with a delayed animation means pressing the button pretty much the moment you see them appear, which can be extra tough because the boss is rendered with higher layer priority, so if it just so happens to drift too close, you won't get to see the projectile until it's too late. Once you figure that all out, you just need to memorize all the dagger patterns, master the timing, and try to avoid getting knocked off. Finally, it dies. Once again, we're spit out somewhere else. Aesthetically, I definitely prefer the overworld. The tones are still muted, but there's more contrast and variety in color. Also, it's not as constrained to the blocky grid, which is very fitting for pixel graphics, but kind of fights with the smooth hand-painted textures and backgrounds. So apparently we didn't kill death after all. Guess that answers that conundrum. Going into town, this old guy suddenly sees the bag I got off that killer duck and is like, "Hey, nice bag, want to marry my daughter?" And I'm like, okay. And then we bond over the fact that both of our faces are melting off. So I guess I'm married now? Anyway, we go into this ice cave, get the fire whip from some old dude, destroy these walls, and cross over this incredibly long swamp. I actually like this part because I get to go faster if I'm spamming jump with all my might, and it makes me feel like I'm actually doing something. At the other side is another dead end, and that damn duck again. This time it's riding on a giant pig, and even though whipping the pig causes it to flash red, hit it until the end of time and it will not die. You need to use your fire whip to kill the duck with fireballs. Compared to the first one, this fight is much easier, and we get another red orb. To actually get into the next manor, we need to stand still in the mud under this wooden cross that this guy warns you not to stand under. Inside is another manor, and yada yada yada. There's some cool monster designs though. This one we need to hit every single white face before it lets us through. There's also these enemies that we need to kill, which appear to be invincible to literally everything until out of desperation you use your magic shield on them. Not to reflect their projectiles, because that doesn't work, you need to physically use it on them. Well, we get another orb, and we need to fight this chick again. Except she's just ahead this time, and floats around while we need to deal with this massive swamp of enemies. To actually hit her, we need to use that item we got to summon a spike under her so we can spear her in her big dumb flying head. Right now we've got everything we need to get to the final boss, but inside this ghost town is a secret side area, this shadow village. Oh my god, it's that guy. They all tell us to meet Beelzebub, and here he is, except his face is all rotted off. You'll never guess what the boss is. It's his face. If this is what it looks like, I think he looks better without it. The moment you spawn, you're suddenly overwhelmed with projectiles. If this happens, I recommend dying and being faster to jump up here and use this item that attracts all of them next time. Each segment of his face is only vulnerable to one weapon, his nose taking the whip, his mouth the hammer, and both eyes either projectiles. After that, we trek through the forest and walk into this fake wall to grab the cross, and there definitely isn't anything else in here. We use that cross here, and we're on our way to the final boss. Except we've got to take a bit of a detour up this massive tower to go find the last side boss. It's a bit of a climb, but it's that chick again. Just keep whipping her in her big dumb googly eyes, and we're out of here with the last orb. Except it's not the last orb. I'm missing one, and I saved past a point of no return. Whoops. Well, we confront Dracula anyway, or his ghost at least. To defeat him, all we need to do is run around and place all the items on the pillars, and then once again use our magic shield as a weapon. Then we're sucked into the demon realm and confronted once again by a bunch of pulsating flesh. These red circles are everywhere and immediately teleport you into instant death. Seriously, they're everywhere and almost impossible to avoid, but turns out you can use the magic shield to just delete them. If you throw enough things at it, it'll eventually explode, but it's not dead yet. You need to climb up here and jump off to get a hit on this big circle. It sends some explosions after you, and you need to climb up 2 more times. Then it dies, and I'm like, now what? After wandering around, turns out we needed to jump into this red circle. Yeah, you know the thing that spelled instant death until now? This one is special, and it spawns after you defeat him, but you wouldn't know it because it's off screen when you do. It really should be blue or green or something. At the end is this orb, and as you'd expect, we smack it until it explodes, and then we win. We get an 8-bit epilogue where we talk to some mysterious man named X and announce that we're quitting and going into retirement, but that's about it. Or at least it is if you don't get all the orbs. Well, this whole thing took about 4 hours, and I'm not going to play it again just to do it myself, so here's someone else's footage. Aha, turns out there really was something else in there. I just didn't try because the fact that there was a red orb right outside and the room itself was hidden made me think that there couldn't possibly be another orb in here. These numbers correspond to the ones in a bunch of books scattered around the game, and they're backwards for some reason. You fight this fetus thing by hurling fireballs at it, and with all the orbs in hand, instead of getting the usual epilogue, this door appears and we confront Dracula for real. There's something about Simon becoming a demon after fighting someone called the First, and that they're in some chaos dimension, and if you die in chaos, you die in real life. Plus claiming that all the subsequent Belmonts in Castlevania were actually partially possessed by Simon to fight Dracula, as he's technically become a demon. And you might not think that all that matters, but it does. It feels a bit brazen for a fan game to insert so much lore into an existing franchise, but it's not like Konami's doing anything with the series. Regardless, this final fight is actually quite impressive. There's some real artistic talent on display here. I can't really speak for the gameplay, seeing as I'm not the one playing it, but visually it gets high marks. Seal of the Curse is very rough in some spots, but you can tell that genuine passion went into it. I feel like if I was a fan of Simon's Quest, I would have gotten more out of it, but for a fan game, it's definitely worth praising. It's not something I'd want to play again, and aside from some really cool monster designs and boss fights, it was often monotonous. But overall, I will avoid committing to an opinion and say that there's a lot of potential and passion, and in the age of soulless corporate cash grabs and pessimism, that's almost enough to satisfy me alone. Especially considering he was so passionate that he put such a tremendous amount of effort into making something that he knew he couldn't possibly make any profit off of. That kind of artistic purity is always worth praising. But finally, Dracula's defeated once and for all, and so the game ends. Can you believe we've still got 3 more of these? Well, I recorded them, so I might as well talk about them. Up next is D1896. The D stands for Dracula. How nice of it to clear that up for us. The name is supposed to reference the year that the first horror movie was filmed, and it runs with that theme by having these film reel perforations visible at all times. And if you thought the colors were muted before, well, now everything is in black and white. The story is, we suddenly wake up in a coffin and don't remember anything about how we got here, but we're pretty sure we're dead. We get out of the coffin and start walking around. Once again, the jumping is fixed height with air strafing. Also, every time I jump, I feel like her thigh becomes twice as thick. You have an attack to summon this sword thing, and by pressing up or down you can control its trajectory a bit, but that's about it for the basic controls. Breaking this thing lets us get out of the tutorial, and we meet this dude named Igor, and he tells us in quite a few words that we're supposed to meet some vampire named Bloody Mary, and that's our motivation. Now we will proceed to walk to the right of the screen until we reach it. Unlike the other 2 games, this one is strictly linear, and reaching a new screen is basically a checkpoint. There's combat as well as platforming, and the attack is just perplexing. It also locks you in a lengthy animation whenever you use it, but if you attack while you're standing, your sword just appears in front of you, but if you do it while jumping, it travels like a projectile, so jumping and attacking is always superior to standing. Even though it takes time to jump, the increased range means you'll still hit things earlier and from farther away. But if you attack while jumping forwards, you'll be locked into that trajectory and most likely collide with the thing you're trying to aim at before your projectile even appears. So for the majority of the combat in this game, you'll be jumping up and down in one spot. If you take a hit, you'll lose your shield, but as long as you don't get hit again, it'll come back in a couple seconds. Naturally, if you get hit without it, you'll die. There's also these orbs that make you double jump when you jump on top of them, and I swear it's harder than it looks. Looking back on the footage, I know now that I was trying to time it to when my feet touch the orb instead of the center of my body, which is probably an instance of modern platforming design polluting my instincts. Sometimes you need to unlearn things for these types of games. We get outside and need to contend with this infinite swarm of enemies, and since attacking locks us in place, it means a lot of standing still and taking things very gradually. There's this giant skull at the other side, and chipping down its health while avoiding the infinite stream takes a lot of patience. It's a good thing your shield regenerates. I've come to appreciate these small mercies. You don't know what some of these retro-inspired indie devs are capable of, okay? It can always be more difficult. After an eternity, we defeat the skull, and we're told that we've beaten the first chapter. In the second, we meet up with Igor again. The dialogue is, it wasn't too bad in the first 2 games I played, but I'm not too hot on it here. This guy gives this lengthy explanation about how teleportation works because, as he says, the undead live backwards so they can manipulate time and travel long distances, but only their souls and not their bodies, and, if you've ever watched that awful Adam Sandler movie Click, it's basically that. It's just needlessly excessive when teleportation in video games hardly even demands explanation. The word pleonastic springs to mind. None of this is relevant to the story, and in a world where audience attention is finite, I'd caution against spending it on something largely irrelevant. Regardless, we teleport to the next stage, which is outside and filled with these destructible blocks. Within moments, we're confronted with this giant gun tower, and this is when you really start to feel the controls fighting you. Okay, I have no idea how I fell off there. We can't reach it without jumping and getting the long projectile attack, but it's so far down we need to start the attack almost as late as possible to angle it down enough to hit it. And how in the world did it just fall off the platform again? I'm not pressing anything but jump and attack. So as it turns out, without pressing anything else, jumping will nudge you ahead by a single pixel every time. I didn't notice at all because I was preoccupied with trying to jump over its projectiles and time my attack right. Also, the aggressive vignette over everything doesn't help either, as it conceals most of my body when I'm up here. So to avoid falling off, I need to make sure I take a couple steps back every couple jumps. After overcoming that gargantuan endeavor, there's another one, and I fail rather spectacularly at timing my jumps and die, so I get to struggle on that first one again. Let's just call it practice for timing my attacks. On the following screen is this mysterious naked man, and he claims that it's only natural that he's naked seeing as he's actually a cat. Well, it is 2023 after all. Anyway, to make a rather long story short, he lost his ball and he wants it back, and that ball just so happens to be flying in the air above a bunch of platforming challenges. It's really just barely in reach with the way it oscillates, but we get it back to him. And going back to the writing, I don't think it's appropriate for your character to go nyan 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 in your Gothic setting, even if he is a cat. There's some major dissonance, and I think anime here mixes about as well as motor oil into the village water supply, or at least that's my opinion. Moving on, there's these exploding things on the floor, and this really exemplifies how superior jumping and attacking is, even for attacking low. There's also this gun tower, and the controls make actually defeating it excruciating. If you're too close, you'll get shot. If you're too far, you can't counterattack, and you'll get shot. With a static jump height, you need to thread this very specific space in between its bullets, slowly walk closer, attack, and then slowly walk back so you can do it again. Chances are you'll get hit, but because of the regenerating shield, you can back off and wait for it to come back. Again, while I'm thankful, it feels like if your game design encourages this kind of strategy, you should probably re-examine it. Thankfully, when we reach the end of the screen, we know we won't ever need to do that again. We meet the cat again, who's lost his ball, again, and he decides to call himself Cheshire. Given you decided to name yourself Alice, it's obviously an allusion to Alice in Wonderland, and our primary motivation is to meet a queen of sorts, but I'm not sure the allusion extends much beyond that. Anyway, we get his ball back, and we're into the next room, which is another one of these horrible gun towers, except this time there's this exploding ball in the way that we need to detonate with our face first if we want to get close enough. I can only hope that this looks as stiff to you as it feels for me to play, but I'm confident in my abilities to adapt to any crap factor. There he is again, asking for his ball again, and we go through his ninja warrior course, again, except it's tougher this time. Here's another bizarre quirk of our weapon. Firing it straight here doesn't reach this, but giving it a bit of an angle does. Well, we get the ball, and he declares that we are now friends, wishes us good luck, and teleports away. Then we've got to contend with these things flying around and knocking us off, and another one of those damn gun towers. Remember in the last game when I complained about all the enemies feeling the same because they're too easy and you're not required to develop any strategies around them? Well, this is the other side of that difficulty dial, where it goes from boring to annoying, and exactly what I said would happen if high difficulty was a factor with these controls. I hate these things, and I can't even see myself up here, let alone my projectiles. I just need to attack blindly, then quickly retreat and attack again. Thankfully, once we're done with that, we're at the end. Then there's this mask here that talks to us, again in several words, saying that it's a demon working for Mary, and waxing poetically about something or rather, but the important part is, we don't need to fight any more gun towers! Really, I've got a pretty high tolerance for this stuff, and I know I always sound like I'm annoyed at everything, but that part was genuinely trying my patience. But I still don't hate it. If you want to know what that sounds like, go watch my potion permit review. Unlike the first and second areas, the third area of the game is almost exclusively platforming, seeing as we've got all these flying spikes everywhere. Despite still being rather difficult, I felt this area played much better than the previous one, and that's because there's nothing to attack and I can focus on platforming. Because I don't need to constantly lock myself into an attack animation, I'm able to retain air control and my ability to strafe. It's still painful though, and this area in particular requires you to go all the way around and to come back, and I probably failed the double jump on these orbs about a million times before finally getting it consistent. But because I have more control, it feels like it was my fault instead of like I'm wrestling with a rusty steering wheel. It really can't be understated how much good controls contribute to the overall experience, and why the removal of combat and the introduction of CBT platforming actually made me feel more engaged. It's still annoying, yes, but that's not that uncommon with difficult platformers, and it gives me something I feel like I can overcome, which to some people can justify the struggle and annoyance. Again, I really feel like you need to play these outlandish games to fully appreciate our modern game design conventions. I believe it was Alan Moore who urged prospective writers to read as many bad books as they do good books, and this is the same thing. If you don't, you'll never truly feel why the things that work, work. Not necessarily implying that this game is bad, but... Well, we climb this massive tower of destructible blocks, and we're on the last screen of this area. And this place is starting to feel like one of those Kaizo Mario hacks with all these spikes appearing out of nowhere and forcing you to memorize the route. I'm sure the difficulty was completely intentional, but it feels like one of those sections where the developer didn't see anything wrong with it because they already put hundreds of hours in the game during development and already know everything about it, and so they didn't realize how trial and error it was. Still better than the gun tower sections though, and trial and error at least feels like you're making progress, even if it is a bit unfair. At the end is another one of these masks, that is pointedly not the same mask we saw before. He asks why we're here, and then launches into some discussion about your Pavlovian associations to flowers, and then we're into the next chapter. At the start, we see Mary. There she is, and we're only halfway through this game. She basically shows up to ask us a bunch of nonsense questions, to which we answer with equally nonsense responses. It's difficult to put this in any way that doesn't sound incredibly harsh, but it's quite clearly the idle philosophical vaporings of the creator, and at least to me, the moment I see the hand of the author peeking from underneath the puppet, the illusion is shattered. You'll see this occasionally in amateur literature where two seemingly distinct entities start rattling at each other with the same beat inexorably towards the same point, almost as if they were sharing the same mind. Well, in any case, she asks us the meaning of life and tells us to meet her at the top of the tower when we've figured it out. Broaching these topics without it coming across like you're using the character as a mouthpiece requires a certain finesse that unfortunately wasn't present here. Okay, what can I say to soften the blow? The character portraits are nice. Suddenly we're zoomed out and we have access to several rooms with this sort of hub area. The rooms are all small, containing one unique monster and these invisible blocks that appear when you touch them. Most of them say 0, but 1 per room contains a certain number instead. And that's it. Beyond that number, it's just a dead end. And that's because in the center of it all is this room, and a locked door that we need to figure out the combination to. The combination isn't made out of numbers, but symbols and magic circles. Over here we find this book that associates the numbers to the symbols, but not the circles. Also, I accidentally exited the game because when you pause, pressing escape closes the game instead of getting rid of the menu like it does pretty much everywhere else, and there's no saving system. I was royally pissed off, until I learned that you can actually teleport to any stage from the start by standing on that teleport block Igor mentioned, then choosing the correct letter. Yeah, it would have been nice if instead of talking about soul transference or whatever, he said, hey, this is how you load the game, by the way, because the only real indication is that when you first do it, it's in the same room you started at. But that doesn't make any logical sense because you walked for several minutes to the right that suddenly appear back at the start when we walk to the right here? Am I supposed to assume that I went in a circle? Whatever. The solution to the puzzle is actually inside the graphics of the attacks from the unique enemies that appear in each room containing one of the hidden number blocks. If we associate that magic circle with the number we got from that room, then use the cipher to put that circle next to the symbol we got from the book corresponding to its number, it'll open. Hooray! There's another masked demon that starts asking us what our favorite shape is, to which we respond with squares, and carry on to the next chapter. And what a chapter it is! The game was black and white before, and now it's blacker and whiter. Welcome to Limbo, and apart from a few cool monster designs, I hate this place. It's a massive labyrinth that's really confusing and tedious to walk through, and I'm not even sure how much I want to talk about this place apart from the fact that when you're forced to retrace your steps for the 10th time, you really start to feel the walking speed. I don't even know how I got to where this key is, and I only vaguely know where to use it, but thankfully we're out of that place. Beyond is this room filled with pulsating white orbs and what appears to be Leonardo da Vinci's tank. And even more of these accursed doors. If you learned anything from the labyrinth, it's that these doors always take you to the same spot, and even though they're here, I'm positive that they're just trying to bait me back into the labyrinth, so I ignore them and I'm quickly proven right. You'll never guess what's after that. Even more doors. Like, so many doors, oh my god, I've never seen so many doors. I think this game might just have the most doors of any game ever. This place is massive. There's some door numbers we haven't seen yet, and I'm so mistrustful of doors I assume that they can't possibly be the solution because there's multiples of them, and my intellect is rewarded after I discover this door among the literal 1,000 labeled with the numeral X. Maybe there was something cool behind them, we'll never know. Entering it brings us to this corridor packed with enemies, and this game doesn't have any volume control, so blowing up all these things at once was also blowing out my eardrums. But we're at the end, and at the end is another one of these masks. The last one, actually, and he's talking about shadows and demons and shadow demons and stuff. After that, we're told that we're on the final chapter. This game's not that long, and it took me about 3 or 4 hours to get this far, but it's one of those games that feels a lot longer than it actually is. There's one final climb up this tower that I wouldn't recommend falling off of, but after that, we're in this hall. We meet the 4 demon masks again, and despite being friendly before, they suddenly decide that we're actually trying to usurp the throne and to challenge us to mortal combat. And you know how most games have their boss fights staggered throughout the game? Well, this game breaks convention by having them all at the end. That kind of revolutionary thinking is exactly what we're here for. For the first one, we're stuck in this narrow corridor and need to constantly dodge spikes from above and below, as well as this sword. It's the same general pattern every time, so it's fairly easy to memorize, but at first I thought all you had to do was survive, and so I spent several minutes doing nothing but dodging until I realized that you're supposed to attack the sword. This whole time I just thought it was another projectile. Sometimes the sword feels impossible to react to if you're on the wrong side when it comes up, and you need to press attack really early to actually hit it. but all things considered, this one isn't that hard. In the next one, we're fighting against this killer chrysanthemum or something, and for all my ragging on the writing, I do appreciate that all of their boss fights are callbacks to the topics you discussed with them earlier. What I don't appreciate, however, is this boss fight. There's two things orbiting the flower. One is just a spiky ball, and the other spawns two homing explosive projectiles every rotation. And I hate these things, because their explosions linger and hit you way after they should. Also, it's cramped in here, and the boss starts to summon spikes everywhere when you hit it, so you rarely get to jump attack, and relying on the ground attack seems to get you hit 50% of the time. It is so aggravating trying to run from one stupid dot in this cramped space where you can't even turn around and attack because of the stiff controls. It's a boss that really rewards patience, just calmly clearing its projectiles and not activating its counterattack unless you know you don't need to dodge anything. But because it's not necessarily fun to control, I'm becoming quite impatient. Regardless, we win. The next one somehow is even worse. Because we said we love squares, apparently we must be destroyed with two giant spiky squares. They just bumble around and constantly fill the entire screen with these death zones. Don't even try to attack them without jumping, cause they'll just smash into you. But what can I even do here? My instincts tell me to jump, but I can't because my jump high is just enough to smash my head into the other one when it's directly above. They also leave these blocks around everywhere to make it even harder to platform. I know it must look like I'm really bad at video games, but unless you're playing it, you don't know. All of your instincts tell you that you should be able to attack it, but you need to understand that there are very few opportunities that don't result in you taking a hit. The only chance you really have to win is to get rid of the first one early and fast, and after that, maybe you can whittle down the other one, but it's so painful to chase this thing down with your clumsy attack. By the grace of God, it dies, and I get to move on to the fourth. This one is much more straightforward. We just attack the thing and try to avoid its infinite stream of projectiles. I hope you've gotten good at timing your attacks and steering them mid-flight, because you need to be taking out these projectiles constantly if you have any hope of counter-attacking. It also has this scythe attack that tries to get you if you're too close, and so you need to be constantly retreating and moving in. And let me tell you, probably the most aggravating thing I've encountered yet. It's this animation glitch where sometimes when you land after attacking, without pressing any other buttons, you'll repeat your attack animation for no reason without even summoning your weapon. I've encountered it before, but here it is apocalyptically bad, because you're guaranteed to get hit by his scythe every time it happens. I have no idea what causes it specifically, but it's definitely not holding down attack when you land. Anyway, if you can manage to avoid that for long enough while being accurate enough to keep the projectiles off your back and dodge its retaliation attack, you'll defeat it and move on to the final boss. It's Bloody Mary, and to make another long story short, we tell Mary our answer to the meaning of life, which is the friends we made along the way. She doesn't like our answer. She thinks our answer is stupid, but it's not like there was any answer that would satisfy her. Well, we need to fight her. She has 3 attacks: shooting a bunch of eyes, casting explosion, and sending a giant eyeball to bowl us over. The only way to avoid that last one is to jump on these teleportation pads. There's also a ton of annoying spike traps around, and setting them off so you can try and dodge without landing on one is a priority. You'll accidentally teleport into an off-screen projectile a couple times, but once you start to develop a mental image of their position even when you can't see them, it's mostly a matter of waiting for her to teleport close enough for you to attack. Eventually we defeat her, and she's pretty angry, but she tells us we're free to go. Except, psych, she powers up with the help of her imaginary friend and becomes this giant face. I actually expected the final boss to be in color as a dramatic break from the established format, but she's extremely white. She kind of reminds me of asbestos. Anyway, instead of cancer, her attack is a bunch of orbs, and her weak point is the torso inside her face. But every time we attack, we're teleported back in between these walls of lightning. And so we must slowly walk towards her, all while avoiding the projectiles and obstacles she spawns. Also, you need to be careful not to attack her when there's lightning below where you'd get teleported. Honestly, it wasn't exactly easy, but I found her easier than most of the other bosses, especially the damn squares. And it's probably because for much of it I wasn't required to attack and could instead focus solely on dodging, similar to my feelings on the 3rd chapter. Each time you attack, it gets slightly more difficult, and you need to be very precise with your attacks or else you'll miss your only chance at clearing out the static orbs, but eventually she'll enter her 2nd phase. Well, I say 2nd phase, but it's mostly dodging these explosions and knocking a hole out of the ceiling, and after that, she vanishes and we win. Then we're suddenly teleported and we're in front of the naked man, I mean cat. Remember last game when I said that all that lore was actually important? Well, this was actually the sequel the whole time. Well, they're in the same universe at least. And this the first that Simon as well as the man called X were after is actually this guy, and he's the first vampire of sorts. He gives us a flower of friendship, and we swear fealty to him. Then the game ends, quite pointedly on a cliffhanger, and that's D1896. So I'm not going to say it's objectively bad per se, and it's rather unique, but out of the 5 games I played, it's probably at the bottom. Speaking of, it's time for game number 4, Cube Gothic, and the last in his so-called Gothic trilogy. Why is all the text backwards? Not sure, but I think the mind that questions the convention of whether the text really needs to be the right way around is a beautiful thing. The game picks back up in the 8-bit realm with Simon, except it's not actually Simon Belmont, it's a legally distinct unnamed character who renounced his previous identity and has no affiliation with that of any intellectual property owned by the Konami Group Corporation. And that's because you can purchase this game on Steam for the low price of $3.99. So it seems X has committed a few war crimes, and we're not too pleased with that, so we kill him to death. But as it turns out, it was all a necessary sacrifice to enter this demon realm, ourselves included. Also, we check in with Alice, who's being held in stasis until an opponent appears. We get some more mirrored text, and finally the game kicks off. It's quite obviously a horizontal shmup in the vein of something like Gradius or UN Squadron. What immediately stuck out to me after playing those last 3 games was how good the controls feel. It's not like it's complicated, it's just moving along a 2-dimensional grid, but it's smooth and responsive, and it actually does what you want it to do when you want it to do it. Turns out the solution to the atrocious jumping physics was to just remove jumping entirely. Full disclosure, I've barely played any shoot-em-ups except for like the Raiden 2 arcade cabinet, seeing as it was at the local bowling alley that I always went to as a kid, so if it looks like I suck, that's why. The game's pretty straightforward. You shoot at things until they die and try to avoid getting shot at. There's a ton of bullets, so it's tempting to call it a bullet hell, but you've also got a lot of health, so it balances out. There's no power-ups either, aside from a sort of explosion spell that clears projectiles near you, and your health is preserved in between stages. But at the end of the 3 stages is the first boss, this giant amalgamation of faces, arms, and eyes. It's called Watchtower, and it seems to be a gatekeeper of sorts. Say what you will about the gameplay, but Arkhouse certainly knows how to deliver a spectacle, and it seems he's only getting better as time goes on. All we need to do is shoot it in the big eye while avoiding the smaller eyes and projectiles long enough to kill it. We move beyond and see this eye monster again, but if we shoot it, we're greeted by this flying head. It's X again, and it seems we're still reluctant partners. He tells us we're headed for the center of the tower to find the first, and that he's going to go scouting ahead while we fight our way there. There's still several grammatical errors present in the script, but I'm liking it a lot more than the previous one, probably because it's more focused and pertinent to the plot. To try and summarize, the first uses this entire demon realm as his base of operations and has been searching for powerful demons for millennia. When he finds one, he rewards them by putting them in cubes that's basically a gamer pod to keep them occupied until he needs them. But for what actual purpose, who knows? Since you watched me play the other games, you might notice a couple reused assets here and there, like these walking things, but it's not like there's anything wrong with that. Also, this killer duck is back, except this time it shoots laser beams out of its body. That's another 3 stages down, and the next boss is this bizarre face on top of a cube. It's called Guardian Cube D, and for the first few seconds you're confused about how to actually fight it, and then you realize that it wants us to do math. It's first grade math, but to be fair, it is backwards and we are being shot at. But we shoot the numbers to increment them, and eventually it exposes its weak point. Considering how cryptic some of his other bosses were, even though I probably didn't need the text, it's a good step forwards in his game design. Afterwards, we come across this enemy and shoot it to talk to X's head again. I'm pretty sure the implication is that he's masquerading as the enemies to remain undercover. He tells us more about the gamer pods, I mean cubes, as well as speculating that the first is actually trying to kick off the apocalypse. He also starts whining at us just because we killed his son at the end of the first game, and he tells us that since we're a demon now, the tower might want to put us into a cube, so watch out. Moving on, this really is starting to look more and more like a bullet hell, but whenever you die, you get to restart at the beginning of the stage, and they're only about a minute long, so even if you're exceedingly bad at video games, you'll still get to the end eventually. Then there's this maze of spikes and flies. It's a lot easier compared to the last game, and I honestly would have preferred if it was actually a bit more difficult. 1 minute really isn't that long when you're in the gamer zone, and it would make reaching the bosses feel more like a reward or an accomplishment. At the end is this teleporter, and the game suddenly breaks form by bringing us to a series of static rooms that we need to get through by shooting these exploding cubes in order to find the teleporter that gets us out. Just in case you were starting to think that this game was a standard side-scroller. Finding the last teleporter brings us to the next boss. It's another Guardian Cube. Guardian Cube F. And we've got more math to do. Except anyone who knows math will see that there's only 2 equal signs and 4 unknowns, so it's quite impossible to solve, until you realize what those comparison operators are trying to tell you. The top one tells us that something is greater than 8, and since the numbers only go from 0 to 9, it's obviously 9. Similar story with the unknown less than 2. Do the math, and we've got 4 and 6 in the last spots. Shoot the weak spot, and we're out of here. So we're teleported to the modern art dimension, and I've got to say, I really like the color balance here. His other games often felt a little washed out, the one in black and white notwithstanding, or at the very least dominated by one color, and here the colors feel a lot more vibrant. And oh my god, I'm in a cube! Well, anyway, it sits very comfortably in the darker and warmer tones, and despite not venturing very often out of the reds, yellows, grays, and browns, it still manages some rather striking contrast while maintaining an appropriately murky tone. The range also fits the sepia tones of older film and photography, which the game is still deliberately invoking. Okay, now I need to get through this extremely long maze. The pause screen is pretty vivid too. Reminds me of patinaed copper. All I'm really trying to say is that I like the colors a lot. It's like he took all the color he would have used in D1896 and put them all here. After the tiresome maze, we're in this room, and when we float around one of these spaces, a number appears. At first I'm like, I wonder what that means, and then I explode. And then I'm like, oh my god, it's Minesweeper. Well, the good news is, I'm a whiz at Minesweeper. I can't believe how many people still don't know how to play Minesweeper. There's only one rule. The number tells you how many mines are in the surrounding 8 squares. If we get hit twice, we die, but that's not a problem for me, and soon we're through. Out of the minefield, there's this larger cube with cubes inside of it, and our friend did say that the only way to escape the cube is to find a cube within a cube, so we upload our soul to the cloud, and suddenly we're inside and thrust into a boss fight. Guardian Cube W. And there's no math this time, it's just a puzzle, and I'm going to be honest, I have no idea how to solve it. There's these colored squares on the walls before each number, the digits go from 0 to 4 instead of 0 to 9, and nothing I thought up seemed to work. I've got no idea how 4 squares of 4 different colors translates into a number between 0 and 4, and so I brute forced it. Here's the solution, and if you think you've found the method to the madness, feel free to tell me in the comments. So we defeat the boss, and we're back to our old selves. And we're not side-scrolling anymore, now we're moving freely vertically. And even though they explode, we need to go around blowing up these TV screens and things that look like radar monitors to search for 2 teleporters. We shoot the numbers inside, and then this teleporter shows up, but when we stand on it, instead of teleporting, suddenly this thing comes down, and now we're inside a coffin. A gun coffin. A coffin with guns. And we're a vertical shooter now, too. This game is just all over the place. We can only take a couple hits in this form, so this section's a little tougher than the rest. Compared to the other games I played, there's not too much to discuss here gameplay-wise. Usually when I play these games, I'll vapor idly about something or rather, and now we've got time, so I often find myself wondering why I even like these games. Clearly it isn't just for the games themselves, there's better games out there. It's about the provenance, its origin, its story, and how it came to be. It's not simply a strange game, it's a strange game from a strange person, or perhaps we should just call him eccentric. Someone had a feeling so strongly in their soul that they were compelled to put countless hours into creating something that surely they must have known would have been a niche within a niche. There's several virtues you could extrapolate from that. There's independence, there's determination, there's passion, and he's an underdog. Plenty of things humans find endearing. And I won't deny that it makes me a lot more forgiving to his game's many quirks and foibles than if it were the product of some faceless corporate hegemony. That's not to imply that there's no value in the games themselves, however. It's not like I'd feel the same about a kick in the teeth just because it came from a struggling artist, but I like to think that the value these games hold is self-evident. But after beating the boss of this coffin section, this ship shows up and fires at us until we're out of the coffin. We return the favor and get to talk to X's head again. He tells us we're getting close, but also that this tower is essentially an enormous nuclear missile capable of destroying the entire planet. Why? Well, presumably because it would be funny. There's also something about vampires being an ancient bioweapon developed by an ancient civilization until the first wiped them all out, but we move on. And we're back to side-scrolling again, this time with these invisible enemies and projectiles that don't appear until we shoot them. More on the human element of these games, I think humans as a concept are constantly building this mental model of the world as they see it, and as you grow older and the model grows more complete, you find less and less that requires special consideration, and you slowly become complacent or even jaded. Eventually it seems that even the people you meet can be neatly filed away and categorized, but if you find someone or something that refuses to fit comfortably into those categories, well, that requires investigation, and suddenly you're interested, racking your brain, even if it is just to mend an apparent flaw in your model. These games are interesting, and I think humans stagnate when they stop having novel experiences. What I'm trying to say is, you should stop playing League of Legends. And oh my god, it's 8-Bit Simon coming after us! Ah! Anyway, we're in this sort of maze thing now. There's not too much to say about it. There's some time paradox stuff going on, but this combined with the maze from earlier makes me once again feel like it's only here to stretch runtime. This game's only around 3 hours long, and I feel like if you wanted to make the game play longer, you should have made the stages longer. Well, after all that, we're at the last of these weird flashback sections, and we appear in this room full of these mannequin-looking things. Then we're trapped inside of a giant skull, but as it turns out, it's just X's new form, and he tells us that there's a crystal nearby which powers this whole place, and if we destroy it, it'll lure the first vampire to us. So without further ado, we press on. The skull ship looks massive, but its hitbox is actually only the little eye in the middle. Just like the coffin, our health is hidden, and we can only take a couple hits. In the next phase, we get to fight a bunch of coffin ships, and then this massive wall of ducks appears. We just need to shoot our way through while dodging the laser beams, and then it's off to the third round. And when you get to the third round, you quickly remember that this game doesn't remain consistent for long. We're in black and white again, and there's numbers everywhere. We can shoot the numbers, but nothing special happens, and it's all quite confusing. And then we get to the end of the level, and the whole thing restarts at the beginning. Now it's even more confusing. We get to the end again, and yeah, we're stuck in an infinite loop. So there's a puzzle afoot, and so you start trying everything you can think of, looping time and time again, trying to search for things behind the numbers, shooting only the non-zero numbers, trying to shoot no numbers, trying to shoot only one kind of number, anything. I was in here for a while, and eventually I realized the solution is to shoot only the numbers that appear once. That would be the 1, the 2, and the 7. And yes, those are the numbers in that flashback. We don't loop this time, and this mini-boss thing appears. After shooting it, a teleporter appears, and we're brought to the monochrome dimension that Alice was held in at the start, and sure enough, the boss is Crystal 7. We first need to take down these glowing orbs while trying to avoid shooting the crystal itself, because it reflects our projectiles back at us, but it's not too difficult, all things considered. There's not many things we need to dodge apart from our swords. Once we clear out all the orbs, we can shoot the crystal directly, and suddenly she goes Toho mode. You can really see how small the hitbox actually is on this thing. As long as you survive that, you should be able to win. We destroy the crystal, and then she appears and turns us black and white, saying we've been sealed. But it seems we recognize her. Yes, remember about 1,000,000 years ago when we got married out of nowhere? Well, it was her this entire time! We have a tearful reunion, and she sacrifices herself to remove one of the seals, and we vow to kill the first even harder than we were going to previously. And lucky for us, he's right here at the end, still completely naked. He's quite an interesting fellow, that's for sure, and after we threaten to kill him, we're thrust into a boss fight. Again with the numbers. As far as I can tell, there's no hints to the combination, and you're just supposed to brute force it, but it's only 2 digits that go from 0 to 4, so there's only 25 possible combinations. We shoot its weak point, and he explodes, but there's no way he's done with just that, and now he wants to show us his ball. His ball is called Legion 52, and you can see where it gets its name, but I'm pretty sure there's more than 52 in there. It's constantly shooting projectiles at us from its eyes, but if we break these bigger eyeballs, we'll reveal another number for us to input. If we shoot the top one, we'll see a 12, and that leaves the other 3 up for us to guess. Once you break all the eyes, the projectiles mostly leave you in peace to figure it out, and so, the orientation of that 12 seems rather conspicuous. Going clockwise, I enter 3, 6, and 9, and sure enough, that's the solution. But instead of revealing its weak point, we're transported to another screen, and it's smaller this time. This thing launches projectiles everywhere, but it's a good thing the game gave us 1,000,000 of these spells to clear them all out. I wasn't sure how to defeat this thing at first, but eventually I accidentally used my spell to damage its core. I kind of forgot because it's impossible to control, seeing as it uses the same direction keys to aim as you're trying to use to dodge, but for a second after using the spell, you get a small projectile you can aim. So now we just need to fire that into its core again and again until it dies. The first isn't impressed. He's so angry he breaks the 4th wall and transforms into this. It's called Nuclearis, and it's big, and it's blue. And I've just got to reiterate, the developers definitely got an eye for the spectacle. Its only weak point is its tiny eye, and it totally saturates the entire screen with projectiles. Fortunately, we've got enough spells left over from the previous fights to block out most of them before they can even get close. With most everything being warmer colors, this big blue monster feels a lot more out of place, and we've got some melancholic piano music playing. Never felt like it fit in the script before, but it's worth mentioning that Arkhouse composes all of his music as well. After quite some time, it explodes and we get the glitchy screen again. Now we're back at the first fight, except he seems to be frozen in time and we can actually attack his body now. We shoot it a bunch and it too explodes, revealing a teleporter. We're back in the monochrome realm, and he's still here, except he keeps teleporting away whenever we get close. That is, until a skull ship appears. He's trapped inside, and X declares it game over. But the first seems unconcerned, and that's not because he's got an ace up his sleeve or anything. If you thought that there was some method to his madness, turns out there wasn't, and he's just insane. Or just doesn't care at all. Like any true anarcho-capitalist, he owned several recreational nukes just for fun. Then he delivers one of the most bizarre lines of dialogue I've ever read. I'm not sure about you, but I have no problem looking at mine. Anyway, he starts breaking the fourth wall again by singing YMCA, and then X DMCAs him out of existence. So he's dead, and we have a bit of a chat with X and decide that it would be best to sacrifice ourselves along with the entire demon realm. The screen goes black, and that's where the game ends. We get a credit scroll, mirrored of course, and then he dedicates this game to the memory of the old Konami. That's raw. I take it he's not a fan of pachinko then. Anyway, we get some art recapping the events of the trilogy, but wait, there's more. It seems the cube is trying to rectify an unexpected time paradox. I'm not entirely certain what that means, but we're back in 8-bit and we meet someone familiar. We've got no memories, and neither does she, and isn't that odd? The only thing to remember is each other's nicknames, and so that's what they call themselves, and the game ends. Honestly, I feel like the creator loved the character of Simon Belmont so much he couldn't stomach not giving him a happy ending. All in all, Cube Gothic was actually alright. Once again, the gameplay felt like it was riding backseat to the style, but so far it's definitely the best of all of them. So I was actually going to end this video with Cube Gothic, especially considering it's already nearly an hour and 15 minutes long, but out of curiosity I decided to check out his latest game on Steam and read this section where he claims it's the greatest video game ever created. He admits he's biased, but I must say I'm curious. So here's to making this video even longer. Saturn Quest R.U.N.E 3000 is actually the third installment in his Saturn Quest series, and you really need to respect the dedication to release a threequel to a series that maybe 100 people have played and whose first installment is mostly negative. Looking at the first one, it seems like just the kind of torture that makes me feel alive, but we'll need to leave it alone. For now. Unfortunately, that means I'll be dropped into this with zero context for any of the story, but I'm here to determine if this is really the best game ever made. Obviously not. That's Factorio. But let's see. This galactic eye opens up, and we're dropped into the middle of space. All we can say is coo coo coo, and we're left to wander around space for a bit. All there is to do is walk, and once again the controls are responsive and do exactly what you want them to do. Which isn't usually something someone feels the need to point out as a positive in a top-down game, but you don't know what I've been through, man. We walk along here and come across this thing, which I can't tell if it's supposed to be someone missing their lower body or just some kind of machine. Also, it can only say nom 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 like I'm back in the 2010s. We yell invective gibberish at each other and we're launched into a boss fight. It flies around, shooting us and dropping planets on our head, and I'm at a loss of how I'm actually supposed to fight this thing. But then this text appears proclaiming the virtues of the bump system and urging us to bump it. And so we walk into it. Sure enough, it deals damage, but we're pretty likely to get hit in the process. We've got 3 hits until we die, and it takes some careful footwork to hit it without getting hit ourselves, but we bump it one final time and it explodes. Then we're trapped in whatever this thing is. I can't help but feel like I'd understand it more if I didn't skip the first 2 games. We shout even more gibberish, and then the game loudly declares that we're entering a flashback, and it's a good thing it tells us because it's not like I would have been able to figure it out from the dialogue. Yeah, so everyone speaks their own flavor of Jabberwocky. For all my ragging on the dialogue and grammatical errors, much like the jumping, it seems the solution was to just remove it entirely. Though, for being complete gibberish, there sure is a lot of this text. I'm not sure if the developer thought we'd be able to piece together what they're discussing from context, but I've got no idea. What I do know is that we're some strange alien thing, and this whole facility is to experiment on us, and I know that because I read the Steam page. So we're dropped down here, and we're allowed to roam around a bit. There's this thing in the center, but we just get more gibberish, so whatever. This thing's a teleporter, and it brings us to a map screen of sorts, but there's only 2 areas we can access right now. So I head to the one labeled H first, and inside are these screens. It's our friend GreenCom, apparently, and thankfully we can actually read the text this time. There's also a cheeky plug for the developer's blog. The computer gives us hints about what to do, and it says we should head to the zone labeled T. So we step back on the teleporter, but instead of being brought back to the map, we're brought back to the center, and then we need to use the teleporter again. Ostensibly because the developer hasn't yet learned how to implement a pushdown stack to save the player's position on the map. It may seem like a small detail, but it can go a long way to improving the overall experience. Even if it's seemingly insignificant, if you know your players, they might carry that attitude into other sections and become less receptive to what you think does matter. Regardless, we've got to get past this small tutorial to open the door by placing a turret. That brings us to the first boss of the game. Not sure why these things are so interested in seeing me fight this thing, but here we go. So to actually fight these things, we need to collect these purple orbs called Nana. Not mana, Nana. There's a few sitting around, but to get the rest, we need to repeatedly bump into this crystal, trying to not get shot in the process. After bumping it a ton, it breaks, and we've got 27 Nana. It'll regenerate later, and in the meantime, we can go over to this console and select a building with Z or K, then walk over to one of these flashing squares to place it. And bam, we've placed a turret. It starts firing at the boss, and we just need to avoid dying while they do their work. They can also take damage from projectiles just like us, so they're not permanent. The reason it's Z or K is because the developer doesn't seem to know how to program in custom key bindings, but he doesn't want to restrict people to one control scheme. And so WASD as well as the arrow keys work simultaneously, and Z or K is your most comfortable action button depending on which you prefer. Yes, barring the pause button and movement, this game only has one button. Balan Wonderworld, eat your heart out. If only it was compatible with an Atari controller. The boss enters its second phase, and once again we're told to bump it, so being very careful, I body slam the thing until it dies. Then these walls close in, and we're reading even more gibberish. I'm not saying you can't have this sort of gibberish dialogue, but when it's paired with an already abstruse plot, it's just another layer of confusion. I'm not sure what we're doing or what my motivation is, so I'm just doing something. And, well, I'm sure we're fine. We're taken up on this elevator thing, and we get a time skip. See, I told you, we're totally fine. The only thing I can possibly glean from this dialogue is I think they're discussing what they're going to make me fight next. But it's not like that information is useful or anything, because I'm going to end up seeing it anyway. We're brought back down to the hub area and to check up on our good friend GreenCom. He tells us that we've got to go to the T block again, but to open it we'll need an artifact from E first. And so that's where we're headed, once again needing to teleport from here, then teleport back into the map. It wouldn't be so bad if it was a one-time thing, but you need to do this every time you want to check up on GreenCom or go to the boss. But that brings us here, and what starts as an empty room soon turns into an alien landscape. I guess this is some sort of holograph chamber. I must say, considering most of his previous work appears to be in traditional painting, he's pretty good at pixel graphics too. This place combined with the music and particle effects has a nice atmosphere to it. But we find the artifact just sitting around in the middle of the floor, and we're out of here. Teleport to the hub again, then to T again, and plug it in. If the boss room was accessible as a door directly from the hub, it probably would have been a lot better. Now we're in the second boss fight, Bioclonus, which appropriately appears to be some sort of biological clone of us. This time we can't fire at it directly, because we can't build any turrets on the tiles facing the boss. We need to take out this zone controller to the right first. Honestly, combining aspects of an RTS with the action of a bullet hell is really cool. Genuinely. The other games I played were relying heavily on their styles, interesting in form but not quite function, but this is actually a really interesting and unique concept. You need to split your attention between gathering Nana and dodging the projectiles coming after you. The projectiles also damage your turrets as well, so you'll be constantly moving between building, repairing, and gathering and dodging, and it's actually kind of fun. But, it feels so close, well, I'll talk about it later. Once again, we're dissected or something and reformed, only to be released so we can go find another artifact. I'm starting to sense a pattern here. Talking to GreenCom again, he tells us that this time the artifact is in a different zone. And suddenly we're horizontal. This place it's not that bad. We're this tiny square, and we just need to go around gathering the nana orbs, trying to avoid dying until we can gather enough to open one of these doors. I'm not sure why these doors take multiple hits and the turret fires so slow. It's not like I've got anything else to do in the meantime, so I'm just forced to stand here and watch it. Yeah, so this place isn't that bad. Until you die and need to do the whole thing over again. There's some heals scattered around, but you should be trying your absolute hardest not to die here because this whole thing takes like 7 minutes. We recover the artifact, and we're out of here. This boss is called Biomuscious, probably because it looks like a mushroom. So we're doing our thing, gathering purple orbs, building turrets, and shooting the boss, and then it just heals itself to max HP. I tried again, stockpiling Nana in an attempt to build enough turrets at once to kill it before it can heal, but that didn't work either. What you need to do is scroll through your console and choose the 4th building. To be fair, GreenCom told me about it, and I just forgot after getting stuck in the wacky corridors for 20 minutes. We build it and then step on it to bring up this projectile. It controls the same as the spell from Cube Gothic, and it's just as difficult to aim here as it was there because we're still trying to dodge. Your best bet is building it directly below where you need to aim so you can quickly push up and get it over with, but we shoot bombs at its eyes until they explode. And then we can shoot it down without it healing. Thankfully, this one doesn't have a second phase. Getting repeatedly smushed like that probably isn't pleasant. But we repeat the cycle of being carried up, regenerating so we can listen to some more dialogue, and then being sent out once again. As usual, we check in with GreenCom, and it tells us to go to Zone S, which it pronounces ass, and then immediately corrects itself and tells us to go to R instead. And apparently our name is pronounced Ass 3000. Good to know. We head on over to R, stand on this pad, and whoa! All of a sudden we're out here shmupping again. And just in case we have trouble finding the only button in this game, it's kind enough to remind us. I actually like it, not just because it called me Captain, but this whole game's got an interesting vibe to it. It's a bit of a, how shall we say, je ne sais quoi. And I've already subjected you to enough of my mawkish rambling, so I'm going to spare you from any further attempts to explain my personal feelings, but suffice to say, it's got atmosphere. This game is really trying to keep things shaken up. It was a similar story in Cube Gothic, where it never remained consistent for very long. But at the end of this section, we've got the artifact, and we can head on over to the next boss. Looks like the mushroom from last time got an upgrade, and it's called Bioschmappus. Well, one paragraph ago I used the term shmup as a verb, so I've got no right to question these things. Unlike the other fights, there's no nanocrystal, and instead it rains from the sky. There's some floating guns that I want to get rid of, but we can't actually damage the boss with our usual turrets. We need to use another special building. It costs twice as much, but we can place it anywhere, and it fires at the boss automatically. It's worth mentioning that repairing your buildings takes 2 nana, and it's definitely a good idea when they're expensive. After letting those whittle it down, its core is suddenly exposed and this platform appears. And looks like we're back to shmupping again. This time firing at the boss's 2 weak spots, and I cannot believe I managed to dodge that. You know what's crazy? I'm actually enjoying this game. The other ones were a bit more like a walk through a museum. Interesting in its own right and intellectually stimulating, but not exactly exhilarating. But this one feels like an actual game, like I don't need to bring in a bunch of external factors to recontextualize it as a work of art or the mirror of some starving artist's soul. It's capable of standing on its own. This time we don't get blown up, and there's this weird pulsating black thing to the left. I'm sure there's some story significance to that, but I've got no idea. This time GreenCom tells us we'll need a password, and he gives us some numbers and directions, but all we need to do is go in here and get the symbols corresponding to the numbers. Some of the numbers are missing, but a quick process of elimination will fill in the blanks. But make sure you write the symbols down because we need to put them in over here in lieu of an artifact. The next boss is called Bio Tower. No gimmicks for this one, we've just got to shoot at it until it dies. Again, I've just got to reiterate that this ARTS system, as he calls it, is actually really interesting, but the reason it pains me so much is because it has so much potential as a concept, and yet it's implemented about as simplistically as it could be. I genuinely believe that this idea could support an entire series of games if it was polished up enough, so let's talk about it. Obviously the concept of fun is impossible to quantify, but for the sake of simplicity, let's just assume that the amount of brainpower your game requires is a close enough approximation. And I could probably talk about this forever, so I'll try to restrain myself, but I tend to look at games through the lens of goals, barriers, and methods. The barriers being what stops you from getting to the goals, and the methods being how you bypass them. They can also be static or dynamic, with the static barrier here being the boss itself, something that's unchanging and constant and brooks no further thought. And the dynamic barrier would be the projectiles, something requiring constant attention and consideration. The goal in this instance is static as well. You win so you can progress. There's no benefit to completing it within a certain time or without taking too many hits, and there's no meta progression like loot or experience based on performance. Methods are almost always dynamic because they're controlled by players, and here we have a couple. The primary method would be dealing damage to the boss, but to achieve that we need to place turrets, and before that, gather the nana. And throughout all of that, we need to avoid the projectiles. It's just a convenient way of breaking complex systems down so you can try to examine each piece more closely. Another term I'll throw out is compromise, or when you need to choose between two or more methods. An example here would be that to gather nana, we need to be away from our turrets, and that means we won't be around to repair them from projectiles. Another would be that to heal ourselves it requires 10 nana, and so to avoid the barrier of death, we strengthen the barrier of damage because of the lost turret potential. These are just examples of the felicitous complexities that can emerge from a seemingly simple framework. Breaking topic for a moment, we've defeated the Bio Tower by climbing all over it, and now we're in another flash forward to the present. We seem to have summoned all of our will to create this exploding thing despite being trapped, and now we're thrown into another fight. We can use it to block projectiles and counterattack, but as I was saying, these dynamics are why the game works. Seal of the Curse, for instance, lacked dynamics because the enemies overwhelmingly did not require any strategy, and so the gameplay outside of the boss fights became the rather static experience of holding down direction keys. Cube Gothic was a step in the right direction, but the combat was basic and similarly forgiving as SOTC, which often made beating the levels feel more like face-tanking a ton of bullets for a minute rather than the result of employing any conscious strategy. Again, showing how a seemingly dynamic barrier can be reduced to a static one just because it doesn't require enough consideration in the moment. D1896 probably would have scored much higher if not for the controls, which I've already covered to death, and Mirage of Dragon, well, that one seems to defy all classification. But the point is that Saturn Quest has a readily apparent goal that requires focused attention and dynamic gameplay in order to achieve. The strength of this kind of dynamic gameplay is partially why so many games such as the Final Fantasy series seems to be moving away from turn-based to action, and the addition of bullet hells to RTS gameplay is in a similar vein. Not to imply the inherent superiority of one over the other, but hopefully you can understand my point. It's my belief that brains generally enjoy finding solutions to things, and even something as simple as this game has a handful of micro-optimizations to consider, which adds to the oft-mentioned but rarely quantified concept of mechanical depth. When you're playing games, your consideration is generally split between short-term in-the-moment things like dodging projectiles in this case, and larger macro strategies. This game is reasonably effective in the former, but lacking in the latter. In computability theory, there's a concept called undecidability. Conway's game of life is governed by very simple rules to determine the life or death of cells, but given any pattern such as this, there is no algorithm, no shortcut that exists which can predict what it will look like 10 cycles from now short of physically computing it step by step. This might sound irrelevant, but it's the best that my computer engineering brain could think of to express this concept. With only a few rules, you have an explosion of novel output that cannot be easily predicted, and human brains love chewing on novel information, so long as they're given reward chemicals in return. Things that are too predictable are boring, but it's not total chaos either. If you know the rules, you can use your intuition to make assumptions towards the general shape of future cycles. Simple rules, complex outputs, and solutions that are sympathetic to structure. This is the core of my thesis for multiplicative game design. Ipso facto, this boss. The only way to defeat it is by using the bombs that we used to defeat the mushroom and combining it with another building to put them into another dimension, also known as the background, and then painstakingly guiding them through this maze to the weak points while we still need to dodge everything. This is an example of additive design. Ostensibly because he didn't feel like his ARTS system was interesting or complex enough on its own, he felt the need to add on a completely new mechanic instead of one that blends with the existing mechanics. It does have some interplay with the bullet hell mechanics because you're forced to split your attention, but it's not quite what I'm after. Outside of the projectiles, the barriers we encounter are predominantly static. The field doesn't change dynamically, and the limits of our structures is to occasionally fire at the enemy. Some of the fights require you to shoot something else before you can shoot the enemy, but the point is, the building mechanic, while interesting, isn't terribly complicated. The Biotower fight was the only one that has regenerating enemy structures, which to me should have been all of them. There's also the concept of terraformed tiles that you can't build on he introduced with the second boss, but the solution was unchangingly, just like anything else, to put down turrets and shoot at something. If instead the terraformed tiles were something that advanced, and you had to work hard to establish a foothold in an area that you could lose at any point, that's dynamic gameplay right there. You could create a mechanic where to claim a tile you have to stand still on it, creating a compromise with the projectiles, as claiming spaces would give you more avenues for attack, but also leave you vulnerable. The player having free reign over the map and being able to attack enemy structures has plenty of potential too. You can show an outline when an enemy building is in progress, and you can determine if it's worth your time to go topple it yourself or try to defend your guns. Again, adding more dynamics through compromises and resource management. That's not even to mention all the different structures you could add, like your own terraformers that keep tiles safe in your absence, shield buildings to protect you and your buildings from projectiles, and maybe buildings that automatically generate mana but are highly vulnerable. Anything, really. Hopefully it doesn't sound like I'm just blowing hot air or projecting my personal preferences onto this, but it feels like his ARTS is 90% A and 10% RTS. Take this boss for example, G-Cat. Its unique gimmick is that we first need to destroy these things so we can place our buildings down, and the console is constantly scrolling through so we need to time it properly. By the way, I appreciate that its name is the chemical basis of DNA. I thought that was a little clever. Admittedly, balancing complex mechanics requires a lot more upfront work than simply coding in a bullet hell, but it's definitely worth it. Some people call what I'm describing emergent gameplay, and you can call it that, but I prefer to call it multiplicative, as it more accurately implies how small mechanics can combine to create larger complexities. Well, we're up here again, except everyone but Dodo Dude is gone now. As usual, we check in on GreenCom, but he's not looking too hot. I can't believe the only thing I can understand in this entire facility is being taken away from me. Truth be told, I actually liked GreenCom. Well, he tells us to head on over to E again, and once again we're in this alien landscape. But this time we can collect these nana orbs scattered around and use them to build a bridge. Doing that leads us to this cave and another maze. There's this ghostly figure in here I'm sure has plot significance, but it mostly points out that this place is filled with illusory walls. There's a definite abundance of these glorified walking sections in Arkhouse's games. I'm not entirely against them as a concept if it gives the player time to digest something, like an elaborate background or set piece, but if it's just wandering through boxes, it's not the best. This is probably where you'd force the player to listen to your exhausting lore dump audio logs if you had them. And through here is another one of these horizontal sections. It's a bit easier than the first, or maybe I've just gotten better. In any case, it's still quite long, and it takes even longer when I've got to play so carefully. Reiterating my point from Castlevania, it feels like if he was more confident in his primary gameplay loop, these sections wouldn't be necessary. At the other end is another surprise boss, and all things considered, for all my ragging on the simplicity of the mechanics, he's certainly compensating with variety. To defeat it, we just need to go down here and spend 1 nana to fire an explosive at it. It's good at keeping you on your toes with all the varied content, but I can't help but think that all the effort in it would have been better served punching up the ARTS sections. Regardless, we're on to the next fight, this massive thing called Penguin Fortress, and we're back to the standard style where we gather nana and place turrets to win. Though the only way to get nana in this one is to bump into the enemy turrets, and that's often hazardous, so make sure you're careful. It seems normal until some time passes and suddenly you're getting barraged by an infinite stream of homing projectiles. It's almost guaranteed death, and to avoid it you need to place this building which acts as a magnet for all of them. But watch out, it can take damage too, and if it dies they'll all come after you, so make sure you repair it often. Honestly, this is probably the best fight in the game because that one mechanic is sufficiently interesting. To actually win the fight, we need to take out both terraformers, and as mentioned before, as a mechanic it's not that interesting, not like the projectiles. Its interplay with the other mechanics is exclusively as a time gate that forces you to engage with the bullet hell mechanics longer, functionally making it a glorified health bar. Additionally, because the building mechanics are so simple, the only effective means of scaling difficulty is to increase the number of projectiles and the duration of fights. Not saying that that's wrong, but again, it feels like the RTS part of this concept is languishing, even though it's so cool. Maybe it's just my instincts to build and optimize things that's doing this to me. Then the second phase starts and it tells us to bump it. But then another message tells us not to bump it and something starts defeating the boss for us. I'm guessing that's the face we saw on that computer screen that one time. But thanks to whatever that is, the boss is dead. In any case, GreenCom ain't looking so good, and the dev really did sneak a Cobb Fifi in there, didn't he? Well, rest in peace, GreenCom. Now we need to figure out what to do next ourselves. And after visiting a couple areas, teleporting is still annoying by the way, eventually we re-enter the room with the codes and see it's glitching out a bit. Turns out there's a hidden wall at the end, and inside is this secret room, containing one of the people who was experimenting on us. And after yelling at each other, oh my god, it's Undertale! So this late into the game, it's still throwing different gameplay styles at us. Really, I would have preferred if there was just one major mechanic that continually evolved throughout the game, rather than these smaller ones that we'll never see again. I think slowly gaining skills or knowledge and utilizing them naturally as the game progresses is a major component towards the enjoyment of video games. Because, while parsing novel input is integral to the enjoyment of anything in life, effectively utilizing information that you've already parsed can be just as satisfying, if not more so, as you start to feel a sort of confidence and surety in your actions. And lacking something like this essentially robs the player of a feeling of growth. Now we're in this weird glitchy space, and instead of getting an artifact, it just drops us off right in front of the boss. And our opponent this time is an entire planet. To attack it, once again we're forsaking our console for anything other than heals, and we're collecting Nana from heaven to fire off these planet buster cannons. Pretty straightforward, but when we fire the final one, suddenly we're thrown into another shmup. It's a bit hard to see down here with all the snow effects, but I've just got to reiterate that I think this developer is quite talented artistically. Reading through the Steam reviews of his games, I saw a review that somewhat irritated me, saying the developer only cared about making art, but if that were the case, I don't think he'd bother with video games. He includes art books with most of his games, and in this one, he cited over 50 different retro titles as inspiration, most of which I've never heard of. I think he likes video games more than anyone else, but rather than only caring about art, I think it's just what he's good at and what he ends up defaulting towards. That being said, I would prefer more attention to be given to the gameplay mechanics. I'm not sure what this face we're smacking is. The other games mentioned Planetus. Is this Planetus? Well, in any case, it explodes and we're brought back to the oh-so-familiar room. Except there's no one else here now, and then this face in the computer monitor starts talking to us and we're sent down just like before. There's one final artifact, and our friend Greencom isn't around to help us anymore, but now we have access to all these weird wormholes on the map and can go to the secret zone that was previously hidden. Inside is water, I guess. Glitchy water. Well, we float on down, and at the bottom is the final artifact. We plug it in and get to fight the last of the ARTS bosses, the G-Cat Infecto Ultimo! To gather Nana, we need to smack these orbs, but every time we hit it, it sends projectiles after us. There's no console here, but what we can do is press K on all of these empty squares and instantly summon turrets. Despite being the final one, this boss is pretty easy, because all the turrets only cost 1 and these spaces back here summon healing buildings, also for 1 Nana. So even if you take damage gathering Nana, you'll always be able to heal yourself. This massive barrage of guns is satisfying to watch though. I just wish I could have experienced it through a more traditional expansion of the ARTS mode where it felt earned instead of given. I think this kind of fight could have worked as a dramatic casting off of the previously restricted system, but only if the game remained constant enough for us to grow accustomed to it. As it is, it feels like the game's been throwing us curveballs at every pitch, and at this point a straight ball would have been more surprising. It explodes, and suddenly we're in space, fighting another one of those things that was researching us. Kind of like that fight in the Flash Forward, we need to use our projectile to block and only attack when we've cleared out all the other projectiles. Then we win and start drifting off into space. And the last remaining researcher goes after us in the other spaceship, and suddenly we're playing asteroids. I'm starting to get dizzy. Okay, this video is already so long, but we're looking for portals to fly into, and one of these places is really insidious because it looks like it's the correct way, but all the portals in there send you back here. But because there's multiple ones in there, you keep going in and trying all of them until you realize it's a completely different portal. But eventually we find the right one and catch up with the space thingy. And by the way, the controls on this thing are awful, like mind-blowingly awful. It's a good thing we don't need to use it for long. Then we're in some other space facility hooked up to some machine along with that other weird thing that was always in the hub, which I think is supposed to be a clone of the researcher currently operating on us, and we play the scary maze game on his own clone and go through all these meat walls, and it's not actually easy because the screen is constantly moving and his big stupid head is in the way. But we do it and move on to the weird alien thing, and then the whole machine starts going crazy, and this thing on the side appears, then the progress bar shows up, and everything starts exploding, and I have absolutely no idea what's going on. And then we're like friends now, I guess, and we're flying off to Saturn 7 or something. And then there's another time skip and we're back in the future. I thought all of this was confusing just because I didn't play the other games, but getting to this part of the script, I happened to read that he actually recommended you play this game first because it's mostly prequel stuff, and that's just... I don't know! I guess I shouldn't be surprised considering this is the same man that made Mirage of Dragon, and I guess he likes his esoteric plots, but I challenge him that for every obscure plot point he wants to add to future games, there should be an incredibly obvious one as well. Now we're in the glitch zone again, and I think I'm suffering from information overload. Even editing this together in post, nothing makes sense. But we go through all this stuff and come across HAL 9000. Yeah, it's just HAL 9000. That's a bit on the nose. I would have at least hinted him pink and called him Pal 2000 or something. At least we can understand him, and apparently we're a cyborg that he created and used parts of GreenCom to implant in our brains. He wants to kill us so he can save the universe, but we're already saving the universe apparently, so screw him. Also, he talks like U.N.E from the Hyperion Cantos, which isn't a bad thing. If you're going to imitate anyone, imitate award-winning novelists. Okay, Arkhouse, if you somehow come across this video and make it this far, send me the script for your next game. I will proofread it and edit it for you, free of charge. I am 100% serious. I am 1000% serious. It would be my pleasure. This isn't just some snide remark, I always sound like this. Business emails on the channel page, can't miss it. Anyway, we defeat Hal by hurling boxes at him, and we enter this room with our adversary and the monolith from 2001: A Space Odyssey. Well, that's not important. What is important is GreenCom's back, and he's apparently installed us with a translator and given us a nickname, and henceforth we shall be known as Captain Navigator. But then he's gone again. Rest in peace again, GreenCom. I've still got no idea if this is supposed to be in the future or past or what. Then we're in this space and touching all these things which are like clone ghosts of the researcher who's our friend now or something, and I'm starting to get the feeling that me explaining events isn't helping at all because I'm just as confused as you are. But after touching all the ghosts, we find him tied up, and we give him our heart, and, he's alive again, I guess. We're back up here on the space trilobite, and we're talking now. Okay, I've given up. I can't believe that after getting the translator, I'm understanding even less. It's certainly interesting, but it would probably be a lot more poignant if I knew something about anything. Even so, Captain Navigator's out here doing his best. Good job, Captain Navigator. Consider me a fan, and I'll probably play your other games someday. All in all, Saturn Quest R.U.N.E 3000 was actually really interesting, and while it's not the best game ever made, it's certainly his best game yet, and it's the first one that made my dusty, mummified heart experience fun. That makes me excited to see what he's going to cook up next, and supposedly it's going to be something called the White Meteor Saga, according to the art book, and part of an impressively ambitious decology. It appears to be an RPG of sorts, but I really hope he revisits this ARTS concept in the future and gives it all the care and attention it deserves. I usually prefer to just show the games rather than dissect their mechanics, but it's an idea that got me genuinely passionate. It would make me sad to see such an interesting gameplay mechanic thrown away without it first realizing its full potential. In any case, we've hauled our bisected torso up this tower, bumped this ne'er-do-well to death, and that's the end of the game. Once again with this homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey. I really hope you've enjoyed this long journey through the catalogs of perhaps one of the most interesting solo developers I've come across. There's other games he's made like Ghost Dream and Dark Dreams RHN I wish I could have covered as well, but just doing these 5 has already nearly burnt me out as is. I know most people would call many of these games objectively bad, but I feel like they're some of the last traces of passion in this godforsaken industry. I know I've already shown you most everything there is to see in these games, so there's not much of a reason for you to go out to buy them yourself, but Arkhouse shows no signs of stopping anytime soon, and hopefully he continues to improve and you'll support him in the future. As always, thanks to all my patrons for keeping me inspired to finish these videos each month. And if you have extra money to throw at me, maybe throw some of it at a starving indie developer from time to time. Anyway, okay, bye.